Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast.
Today, we are strapping in for a journey back to the volatile heart of Renaissance Italy, specifically 16th century Florence.
And this deep dive is dedicated to a man whose name, Niccolò Machiavelli, has become, well, synonymous with a certain kind of ruthless political strategy.
A study in power that remains, shockingly relevant half a millennium later.
Absolutely. That man is Niccolò Machiavelli. And our mission today is, I think, pretty ambitious. We want to cut through the centuries of moral condemnation.
All that knee-jerk Machiavellianism.
Exactly, and really examine the central work that earned him this infamous reputation, his treatise Il Principe, or The Prince.
And we should be clear, we are not here for high-minded ideals.
No.
Yeah.
We want to understand his political science, which at its core sought to establish the difference between what should be and what is. It's a technical analysis of power, almost completely divorced from traditional idealistic morality.
And you just have to understand the setting. Machiavelli's revolutionary work wasn't born in a quiet, stable academic corner.
Not at all.
It emerged directly from the chaos of the 16th century Italian city-states, a region just constantly being ravaged by foreign armies and, endless internal betrayals.
A tumultuous playground of passions, as one source puts it.
That's a great way to describe it. Political power was both a refined, highly dangerous art form and this ceaseless cycle of creation and destruction. This environment, this constant existential struggle for survival it was the perfect crucible for generating a cold, hard, purely technical concept of politics.
So Machiavelli observed the furnace.
And Il Principe was the steel he forged from it.
Okay, so let's unpack the man himself, Niccolò Machiavelli, before he became this reluctant philosopher of necessity. He was born Niccolò di Bernardo de Machiavelli in Florence, May 3rd, 1469, and he died June 21st, 1527.
Right. But for the vast majority of his working life, he wasn't a philosopher at all. He was a dedicated, very pragmatic statesman.
A man of action.
Absolutely. When the powerful, and let's be honest, often tyrannical Medici family were unceremoniously thrown out of Florence in 1494, Machiavelli began a highly successful career serving the newly restored Florentine Republic.
And he rose pretty quickly through the ranks, didn't he?
He did. He eventually became Secretary of the Signoria and, most importantly, the head of the Chancery of the Ten. That was known as the Dieci della Guerra e di Balia.
And that's a critical detail. He wasn't just, stamping papers in some back office.
No. Being the Secretary of the Ten meant he was essentially Florence's chief administrative and diplomatic officer. He was deep in the mechanical reality of running a state that was constantly in crisis.
So we see him traveling constantly on these demanding diplomatic missions to France, to the Emperor Maximilian.
And most famously, to the courts of Caesar Borgia.
Right. And this work wasn't just administrative, it was incredibly formative for his thinking.
It was everything. Seeing the power and, frankly, the organizational genius of someone like Caesar Borgia up close gave him this first-hand masterclass in how power could be swiftly and brutally consolidated in a disorganized region like the Romagna.
But maybe his most profound practical contribution was in military affairs. He seems to be one of the first figures in Italy to really recognize the utter unreliability of hired foreign forces.
He was. He saw that military strength was the absolute foundation of state stability. The sources really highlight that he actively engaged in reforming the Florentine military. He worked tirelessly to replace those unreliable mercenary forces.
The condottieri.
Exactly, the condottieri, with a national citizen militia, what they called the ordinanza.
And this wasn't just some theoretical preference for him, was it? This was existential.
Completely. The condottieri were proving useless, or in many cases worse than useless. They were expensive, they were unreliable, and often they were politically motivated to prolong conflicts rather than to actually win them decisively.
Because a long war meant a long paycheck.
You got it. Machiavelli saw the citizen militia as a direct reflection of a people's commitment to their own state. He felt this push for national arms so intensely, and the successful effort to finally take Pisa in 1509 was seen, at the time, as his personal vindication of this whole system.
So his dedication at this stage was unquestionably Republican, deeply rooted in practical statecraft. He's at the peak of his career, a successful diplomat, a military organizer, a dedicated servant of the Republic. So what happened? How does this actor on the world stage become the theorist in the study?
The catastrophe, as the source material calls it, struck violently in 1512. The Medici returned to power.
Backed by foreign arms, of course.
Backed by formidable Spanish arms, yes. This led to the total collapse of the Florentine Republic and the overthrow of his patron, Piero Soderini. For Machiavelli, his world ended overnight. He was immediately stripped of all offices, terminated,
The phrase they used was "Cassaverent preverent et totaliter amoverant."
which just captures the totality of his political ruin. He was completely removed.
And that is a devastating career-ending moment. To go from the epicenter of European diplomacy to being, well, utterly irrelevant. But the hardship didn't stop there.
It got much worse. Shortly after his political fall, he was wrongly suspected of being part of an anti-Medici conspiracy. He was imprisoned, and he endured torture by the rope, the strappado.
Oh, wow.
And though he was released, thanks to an amnesty that was granted when Medici became Pope Leo X, the psychological and physical scars were deep. His life as he knew it was just shattered.
That revelation, that his greatest work was born from this profound frustration and physical suffering, it really changes how you have to interpret its goals.
It has to. After his release, he was forced into this humiliating exile on his small estate near Florence. And you have to understand, he wasn't enjoying some kind of philosophical retirement.
Not at all, from the sounds of it.
Not remotely. He viewed this forced idleness and relative poverty as a cruel and specific kind of hell. I mean, imagine going from advising the King of France and negotiating with Cesar Borgia to chatting with woodcutters and playing cards in the local tavern.
He must have been desperate.
Completely. He was writing constantly to friends like Francesco Vittori, seeking any possible avenue for reinstatement, even calling the Medici his lords, despite his prior Republican loyalty.
So the theoretical work, the writing of Il Principe, was therefore a highly involuntary and unwelcome necessity.
A substitute for the life he desperately wanted back. Yes. The scientific value of his work was created, and this is a quote, through higher force and in the worst mood imaginable.
So he's not a philosopher seeking some abstract truth?
No, he's a political actor who can no longer act. Writing about statecraft was the only way left for him to talk about the state. He felt his time in the study was just a surrogate for real action. He famously said he'd rather roll a rock in practice than recognize truths without effect in state robes.
This intense, lifelong desire to get back into the business is what fueled his writing then. It makes Il Principe a potent, experiential offering meant to prove his unparalleled political insight to the very people who had ruined him.
Exactly. It's the most sophisticated job application ever written.
Okay, so framed as this desperate, highly focused job application disguised as political science, let's look at the actual structure of Il Principe. It begins with a very dry, almost clinical classification.
It does. Machiavelli starts by dividing all states, all dominions that have ever held power over men, into either republics or principalities. He then immediately subdivides principalities into hereditary, entirely new, or mixed.
And the early chapters move pretty quickly past the easy cases to focus on the really difficult challenge, right?
The Principe Nuovo, the new prince, and the acquisition and maintenance of power in a brand new state.
He gives the hereditary state very short shrift.
Well, because they're the least technically interesting. Hereditary states are just easier to hold. People are accustomed to that lineage. The prince simply needs not to break the traditions of his ancestors.
Just don't rock the boat.
Pretty much. Just deal prudently with circumstances. The real difficulty is not in managing an existing state, but in creating a new one.
And the inherent difficulty in establishing a new or mixed principality, according to Niccolò Machiavelli, it all stems from a psychological constant: human nature's dissatisfaction.
Precisely. The moment a new prince arrives, he faces this inherent turbulence. Men willingly change their rulers, always hoping for improvement, but they're inevitably deceived. They soon find by experience that they have gone from bad to worse.
Why is that?
Because a new prince is always compelled by necessity to burden his new acquisition. He has to bring in his soldiery, he has to raise taxes, and 1,000 other hardships that are just required to consolidate power.
The sources cite the example of King Louis XII of France, who quickly occupied Milan and then just as quickly lost it.
Perfect example. The populace welcomed him at first, but they were immediately disillusioned by the ill treatment and the inevitable burdens that the new regime imposed on them.
And this empirical observation leads into one of his first sort of grim technical rules for stability.
It does. If a prince acquires rebellious provinces a second time, they're not so lightly lost. Why? Because the prince can now, with very little reluctance, use the opportunity of that rebellion to punish the delinquents, clear out the suspects, and strengthen himself by making the cost of defiance crystal clear.
It's a cold application of force, justified by necessity, all to achieve long-term order.
Exactly.
And this focus on decisive action brings us right to the most essential foundation for any state. It's military. And this is where Machiavelli launches his full-throated condemnation of the 16th century status quo.
Oh, absolutely. The condemnation of mercenaries and auxiliaries in chapters 12, 13, and 14 is one of the most powerful and personally informed arguments in The Prince.
He says emphatically that a state that relies on hired arm or foreign auxiliary forces is weak, betrayed, and sold.
He calls the mercenary captains, the condottieri, completely untrustworthy. They're driven by self-interest. If they are capable, they aspire to their own greatness, and they often turn against the prince who hired them. If they're unskilled, well, the state is just conventionally ruined by incompetence.
He argues that the entire condottieri system had brought Italy to slavery and contempt.
He details why it failed Italy so profoundly. Mercenaries, you see, they subsisted solely on their pay. They had no existential stake in the outcome of a war.
They didn't care who won as long as they got paid.
Exactly. They employed every art to lessen fatigue and danger for themselves. They avoided night attacks. They refused to campaign in the winter. They didn't kill in the fray. They took prisoners and then liberated them without ransom. They turned war into a profitable, drawn-out game of tactical chess.
They were prioritizing survival and salary over decisive victory and the security of the state.
Always.
And what about foreign auxiliaries? Forces called in for help, like the Spanish troops Pope Julius II used against Ferrara. He says they were arguably worse.
Yes. In Machiavelli's analysis, auxiliaries are a classic example of winning the battle but losing the war. If they lose, the prince is undone. But if they win,
You become their captive.
you become their captive because their power is now too great, and you are totally reliant on foreign strength. He gives the example of the Romans. They kept their power as long as they fought with their own armies. But the vigor of the empire began to decline the moment they started enlisting the Goths. The value of the national army was transferred to others.
So his doctrine is ironclad. The only true foundation for a prince, the only thing that is sound and reliable, is his own arms.
A national militia, the people in arms who have a direct personal stake in the outcome. It's more than just tactics. It's a structural prerequisite for political autonomy and effectiveness.
So if a prince wishes to maintain his state, he must have this deep understanding of war.
He must live and breathe it. He needs to be constantly studying the rules of war, the lay of the land, the movements of history. He cites Philopoemen, the prince of the Achaeans, who always had his mind occupied with military training and tactics, even during peacetime walks with his friends. For Machiavelli, war is the ruler's only true art.
This detailed analysis of military necessity really underscores the political practicality of Niccolò Machiavelli. By the way, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this deep dive.
All right, so moving from military technique to the psychological and moral conduct of the prince, we arrive at the segment that has generated the most controversy and misunderstanding for 500 years.
This is the core of Machiavellism, isn't it?
This is it. Machiavelli's primary purpose here is to separate political effectiveness, the ability to hold and maintain power, from traditional moral virtue.
He treats political action purely as a technique, a set of technical rules formulated only if the goal of securing the state is pursued without any reservation. He's not concerned with the ideal.
No, he's concerned with the empirical reality of human nature and political governance. And that is the revolutionary part. He states it clearly in chapter 15. He says he writes on what is and not what ought to be.
And he observes that a man who professes goodness in all his activities will necessarily come to ruin among so many who are not good.
Therefore, a prince who wishes to maintain himself must learn how not to be good, and to use or not use this knowledge according to necessity.
I mean, that is a direct contradiction of all classical and Christian political philosophy up to that point. Let's start with chapter 16, the choice between being seen as liberal or generous and being seen as mean or miserly.
Right. So everyone wants the reputation of liberality. It sounds good, but Machiavelli points out that practical liberality is economically ruinous.
How so?
Well, if a prince is truly generous, he has to consume all his property to maintain that reputation. And to keep up this appearance of magnificence, he's eventually compelled to unduly tax his people.
And the result is immediate. He offends the many people he takes from, and he only rewards the few he gives to. He ultimately generates poverty and hatred among the general populace.
So the wise prince, Machiavelli concludes, should not fear the reputation of being mean or miserly. By being economical, he ensures his revenues are sufficient to defend himself, to pursue necessary projects.
And crucially, to avoid burdening his subjects.
Exactly. By not taking from the people, he exercises a true liberality toward the vast majority. Prudence and restraint, not extravagance, are the marks of effective leadership here.
Okay. Now, the comparison in chapter 17 is even more shocking. Cruelty and clemency. He says a prince should desire to be considered merciful, but must be extremely careful not to misuse clemency. How does Niccolò Machiavelli justify what he calls necessary cruelty?
He establishes a kind of calculus based purely on the common good. Cruelty, when used effectively, must be swift, decisive, and focused. It should aim to restore peace and loyalty.
And the ultimate historical exhibit here is Caesar Borgia.
It is. Borgia, though considered cruel, used that necessary harshness to unify the Romagna. He restored order, peace, and stability where before there was only anarchy.
So in Machiavelli's analysis, Borgia was actually more merciful than Florence.
Exactly. He contrasts Borgia's targeted cruelty with the Florentines, who, to avoid a reputation for being harsh, allowed internal disorders, murders, and robberies to fester in Pistoia.
So their excessive clemency harmed the whole populace just for the sake of avoiding some temporary bad press.
Right. Cruel actions, when they are necessary for the security of the state, should affect the individual only but secure the well-being of the majority. It's pure political triage.
And this utilitarian calculus leads directly to that core psychological assessment. Is it better to be loved or feared?
Well, Machiavelli begins from his observation that men are generally base, ungrateful, fickle, cowardly, and greedy.
A pretty dim view of humanity.
A very dim, but perhaps realistic view. He says love is preserved by this weak link of obligation, which breaks at the very first opportunity for personal advantage. Fear, however, is preserved by the dread of punishment, which is a powerful and reliable deterrent that never fails.
So if the prince cannot be both loved and feared, it is far safer to be feared.
It is. But, and this is the critical caveat that so often gets overlooked in the popular understanding of Machiavellism, he must, above all, avoid being hated.
Hatred is the political poison.
It is. You can be feared, but you cannot be hated. And how does he avoid hatred? By refraining from seizing the property or the women of his subjects.
He says men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their inheritance.
An incredible line, isn't it? When a prince must act against a subject's life, it should be done with proper justification and a manifest cause. But the core message is that the prince must satisfy the fundamental material security of the people.
Which loops back to chapter 20 and the discussion of fortresses. The best physical defenses are useless if the people hate you.
Absolutely. The best possible fortress is not to be hated by the people. He points to historical reality. Fortresses offer no defense if the people are allied with foreign invaders. If the people hate you, there will never be a shortage of foreigners willing to assist a populace that has taken up arms against you.
The loyalty of the masses is the ultimate and cheapest defense system.
It is.
Which brings us to the most infamous instruction of all, keeping faith. In chapter 18, should a prince keep his word?
Well, Machiavelli starts with a theoretical ideal. It's praiseworthy in a prince to keep faith, but he immediately pivots to empirical reality.
As he always does.
As he always does. He notes that history shows that those who have done great things have held good faith of little account and have known how to circumvent the intellect of men by craft. The political world is a realm of force.
And a prince must know how to use both the law, which is the man, and force, which is the beast.
That's the famous mythological analogy drawn from the centaur Chiron educating Achilles. The prince needs that dual nature. He must learn to be the fox, to recognize traps, and the lion, to frighten wolves.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means the prince should only appear to possess the desirable qualities: mercy, integrity, humanity, religion. He must maintain this public image, but internally, he must be prepared to act directly contrary to these virtues when the state's security requires it.
And why is merely appearing virtuous sufficient? This goes back to his cynical view of the populace, doesn't it?
It's highly cynical, yet I think profoundly observant. Machiavelli explains that men judge generally by the eye and not by the hand. Seeing namely can everyone, understanding can few.
So most people are just swayed by appearances.
By appearances and by the outcome, the ultimate success of the prince in maintaining peace and order. Few people truly know how the prince operates in reality. As long as he succeeds in maintaining the state, his means, however harsh or deceitful, will always be judged honorable by the masses, because the masses value stability above all else. The successful result retrospectively justifies the necessary action.
All right, so now we move from the technical manual into the deeper, almost metaphysical layer of Niccolò Machiavelli's thought. This is where he introduces the two great forces that govern history and political success, virtù and fortuna.
Exactly. This isn't about tricks anymore. This is about understanding the structural demands of the world. Machiavelli moves beyond how a prince acts day to day to analyze the underlying factors that allow a state to be created and to endure.
So let's start with virtù. As you said, this is not virtue in the traditional moral sense of, say, goodness or piety.
Not at all. That's the most common mistake people make. Virtue is, well, it's a mysterious, enduring substance that expresses itself as political energy.
Political energy. Can you unpack that?
It's prowess, foresight, cunning, and the raw will to rule and to achieve historical greatness. While the classical Roman virtus was linked to morally clean and disciplined citizens, Machiavelli hardens the concept. He applies it to anyone, even a morally corrupt political adventurer who exerts total, focused energy toward long-term governance and power. It's all about efficacy and political skill.
So a man can exhibit great virtue while being utterly cruel and ruthless.
Provided that ruthlessness is focused entirely on the creation and maintenance of the state. That is the crucial Machiavellian distinction. The highest performance of virtue is the creation of a state or an empire. It's the ability to adapt to circumstances, to see a future threat clearly, and to act decisively to counteract it. It's the political genius that tames the world.
But virtue alone is not enough, is it? It's constantly being challenged by its opposite force, fortuna.
Right. Fortuna fate, or chance, determines, according to Machiavelli, about half of all human actions. She's a powerful, unpredictable entity drawn from classical mythology. She's half goddess, half monster.
And he often depicts her metaphorically as a raging river that just ravages the land.
He does. And the only defense against that river is to anticipate its coming and to build dikes and embankments in advance during times of calm.
So this brings the concept of foresight into sharp relief. Virtue is the ability to build those embankments, anticipating the inevitable torrent of fortuna.
Exactly. But he also famously depicts Fortuna as a woman who needs to be mastered. He advises that it is generally better to be impetuous than cautious when dealing with her. For Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to hold her down, you must beat and strike her.
A very aggressive image.
A very aggressive, very Renaissance image. This daring energy is required because political success depends entirely on conforming one's personal method, whether it's caution or haste or force, to the qualità dei tempi.
Qualità dei tempi, the spirit of the times. Now that is a profound insight into historical mechanics. It suggests that success isn't just about having the right skills, but ensuring your core temperament aligns perfectly with the present structural demands of the historical moment.
It's the ultimate measure of political intelligence. If the times demand caution and you are naturally impetuous, you will fail. If the times demand boldness and you are cautious by nature, you will also fail. The structure of the era dictates the success of the leader.
And Pope Julius II, who he cites in chapter 25, is the prime example of aligning oneself perfectly with the qualità dei tempi.
The perfect illustration. Pope Julius II was known for his impetuous, hasty nature. He went to work impetuously in all his affairs, often rushing into situations that others would approach with great caution.
And crucially, Machiavelli says he found the times and circumstances conform so well to that line of action that he always met with success.
He did. The geopolitical structure of the early 16th century required speed and decisiveness. If Julius had paused to negotiate, to calculate every risk, the opportunity would have been seized by the French or the Spanish. His audacity, his sheer force of will, broke through the political inertia that was suffocating Italy.
A cautious pontiff could never have achieved what he did.
Never. But the tragedy, according to Niccolò Machiavelli, is that the individual is fundamentally constrained by his own nature.
Right. He can't change who he is.
Correct. Machiavelli concludes that, had the times changed to require caution, Julius II would have inevitably failed because the person cannot easily change their deeply ingrained temperament.
Yeah.
They're wired for one kind of action. But here, Machiavelli offers a subtle but crucial advantage for the Republic over the monarchy.
Which is?
A state, being a lasting entity, has an advantage over the individual ruler. It can recruit new men, different magistrates, with new temperaments that fit the shifting needs of the time. If the era demands caution, they can elect a cautious leader. If it demands force, they elect an aggressive one.
So it's more adaptable.
Far more adaptable. And that, for him, proves the structural advantage of a well-organized republic in responding to the changing qualità dei tempi, compared to a monarchy, which is stuck with the temperament of one person for a lifetime.
This analysis brings us to the ultimate, deepest layer of Niccolò Machiavelli's thought. Il Principe isn't just a generic guide for any ruler. It is fundamentally the ethic of the historical hour.
Yes, it's desperately connected to the concrete, desperate demands of his Italian present, a fractured, exploited peninsula suffering from a deep corruzione.
And the term corruzione is key here. It doesn't just mean moral decay, does it?
No, it's more like political rot. The erosion of public spirit, the fragmentation of loyalty, and this pervasive reliance on foreign powers that had made Italy so weak. And so the anonymous figure of Il Principe that dominates the treatise is a very specific, constructive ideal type.
He's a modern man designed specifically to address the unique political and moral decay of Machiavelli's Italy.
Absolutely. This ideal new prince is meant to be the fighter against Fortuna and the fighter against corruzione. He must be introduced by fortunate chance, or opportunity must present itself, but he has to immediately and subsequently build his power solely on his own virtue to create permanent foundations, stable laws, and lasting order.
He has to be the one who can make something enduring out of this worm-eaten, chaotic political material.
That's the job. And this is why Caesar Borgia, despite being the textbook example of political technique in Chapter 7, ultimately fails to be the final ideal.
So Borgia is the historical core, but not the finished product.
Exactly. He achieved a great positive performance. He created order, law, and security in the Romagna from absolute political chaos in a very short time. He showed technical genius and massive virtue.
Oh, what?
But his power was too reliant on the fortuna of his father, Pope Alexander VI, and on foreign arms. When Alexander died, Borgia did not have the independent foundation or the ultimate virtue required to overcome the simultaneous assaults of fate and circumstance. The ideal prince must overcome fate, not merely ride its wave.
And the sheer monumentality of that task, creating a state from corruption, means that the new prince must be capable of acting ruthlessly, using both corruption and sound virtue, purely for the purpose of state creation.
The ends justify the means, because the end is the existential survival of the society. That is the final analysis. The seemingly cold, amoral technique is ultimately justified by a grand, heroic vision. This entire analytical project, the discussion of military technique, necessary cruelty, strategic deceit, it all culminates in Chapter 26.
The final, passionate appeal for a leader to unite and liberate Italy from foreign domination.
Yes.
It's an almost astonishing rhetorical turn, isn't it? Going from that clinical detachment to just sheer desperate patriotism, he is calling for a prince to bring law and leadership to an Italy that is uneasy, enslaved, plundered, without law, and without leadership.
This is the moment when the mask of the detached scientist falls, and you see the passionate Florentine patriot underneath. He speaks directly to the political will that has to accompany the technical genius, Niccolò Machiavelli asks.
With what love would he be received? With what thirst for revenge? What unshakable loyalty? What reverence? What tears? What door could be closed to him? What faction refuse him obedience? Which Italian would deny him service?
It's pure passion. And that deep desire for national unification, for stability and self-determination, that is the ultimate justification for all the harsh lessons contained within the prince.
So it connects the seemingly ruthless technique and the structural analysis back to a substantial historical will. The necessity of his time dictates the ethical framework of the political actor.
And this final crucial point is why Il Principe remain so relevant. It is a work of necessity, written by a man who saw his homeland reduced to a battlefield and concluded that political philosophy must not be about wishful thinking. It must be about dealing with men as they are in a world where chaos and self-interest reign.
That was an incredible deep dive into Niccolò Machiavelli, the man, the context, and the foundational mission of Il Principe. His work, born from desperation and the sudden loss of power, really wasn't just a manual for tyranny.
No, it's a cold, hard, empirically driven analysis of power, divorced from traditional morality, seeking political success and state survival above all else.
So if you take only a few things away from this deep dive into Il Principe, what should they be?
Okay, here are the key takeaways.
First, the necessity of separating political effectiveness from traditional moral virtue. The prince has to prioritize success in statecraft, even if it requires appearing merciful while being prepared to act contrary to it.
Second, the paramount importance of having one's own national arms. Reliance on mercenaries or foreign auxiliaries leads inevitably to the political vulnerability he witnessed in his own time, slavery and contempt.
Third, that enduring power dynamic between the prince's virtue, that political energy, skill, and foresight, and the unpredictable, violent force of fortuna, or chance and fate.
And success is found in aligning your virtue with the structural demands of the qualità dei tempi, the spirit of the times.
And finally,
And finally, the ultimate function of the prince is to bring order and stable power, especially in chaotic times defined by corruzione. Even if it requires harsh methods, it's all in service of a greater patriotic goal, like national unification.
it makes you wonder then, if political action must always conform to the harsh spirit of the times, and if political success is measured solely by the maintenance of the state, does Niccolò Machiavelli's counsel remain eternally relevant wherever power is sought, regardless of the stated intentions or the type of government?
Is the prince just a cynical product of the 16th century, or is it an operating system for power that transcends all political eras?
That's something for you to mull over. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Until next time.